Hello everyone, yet again, welcome back to Archangel RC. Today we will be diving into the archives because I do have some builds which for some reason or another have not made it to YouTube yet, but I feel like it's time to remedy that situation for some of them. What I want to present to you today is the MARS 1.2 meter wingspan FPV plane. This is one more example how I got something first and am literally the last one to make a video on it long after it's been discontinued, even though I was done with the build, flying, testing and ultimately the crashing as early as January of 2022 and still managed to get distracted with something else and not make the video until now. From what I could see, all other reviews on this plane were published between June and December of 2022, while I had everything I needed to make the video as early as January, so that would have been a pretty nice head start for the video, and I failed again. And there has been a lot of that from me in the past few years. I just hope I can catch up on some of that now and perhaps to keep the delays to a minimum in the future. Back then I did talk to the designer of the plane. I was left with the impression that he was a very nice guy, easy to talk to, competent, so yet again I offer my apology for having delayed this so much. Now, from what I can recall of the build process, the plane was designed pretty well. It arrived with the majority of the gluing work done. I did not, however, like the way the vertical stabilizers were mounted and always felt that was a weak point. The plane also came with the standard, for the time, array of nose adapters for various cameras, including one for the Runcam 2, though I went with my first gen DJI Osmo Action. It was the best camera I had at the time, and it actually is still the best camera I have today. I still use it, that same one, first gen Osmo Action. Solid piece of kit that one is. Fun fact, the plastic nose piece was actually 3D printed since the unit I had was something of a pre-production model, and the designer said it should come with a proper injection molded part when it finally goes into production. Since the DJI Osmo was going to be occupying basically the whole inside of the nose, I installed the FPV camera quick and dirty on the top of the nose by screwing the mount into the plastic. Worked pretty well. Camera is still there even after the crash, and a lot of other stuff isn't. The plane came with motor, ESC and servos, and the servos were metal geared ones, so I did not feel like I had to replace anything. Since the motor was 1100 kV and pretty chunky, I went with a 4S battery, in fact the same one which is now powering my new Razor Crest, so as you can see it has been in service for a while and it wasn't new even then. Not that I remembered, but apparently I went with an APC 10x7 electric pusher prop, which explains why I'm launching the plane the way that I did. I went with the COAV X7 Plus flight controller and the COAV Neo 3 GPS unit on this build. Yes, I know this is a serious overkill for this type of plane, but I had them and needed to test them, so might as well put them in the new build. Between this flight controller and the battery, despite their sizes, there was still a lot of room left, so this thing can definitely fit more gear in it, though whether it can safely carry it was a whole different story. For a control system, I went with an FR Sky R9 series receiver, and I also decided to actually go ahead and build this with a 1.3 GHz video system. I've had the 1.3 GHz video gear for ages at this point. A friend of mine built me a panel antenna for the antenna tracker on the ground, also ages ago. I'd never used it, so thought it is probably about time I did. And so, after a not too lengthy build, the MARS plane was ready to roll. As the plane is literally a mutated flying wing with a nose and a V-tail, and given that huge prop at the back, I wasn't going to risk throwing it the regular way like I would the Reptile or the Razor Crest, so I threw it like I would throw a wing. Watching this clip now, and given that this plane is equipped with a 1.3 GHz video system, I cannot for the life of me remember why I have the 5.8 GHz video system on the antenna tracker. Only thing I can think of is that I must have had another plane with me at the time, plus also I suppose the ground side of the 1.3 GHz video system must not have been prepared for the tracker since I didn't use it. Maiden takeoff was executed with an auto takeoff, as is tradition for me, and it was flawless, and that motor paired with the 10-inch prop did create a lot of thrust. Once in the air, it did feel pretty decent. So long as you applied the throttle, it felt solid and moved around with authority. That UAV X7 Plus autopilot was certainly doing a good job as well, and on default RG-Pilot parameters too. I did test the low speed ability, and in those tests it did pretty good and seemed to be able to slow down a bit. But testing the stall behavior did show a worrying tendency to go into tip stall, and to tip stall in a way which required serious intervention. Simple action isn't going to take it out of it, which also meant that I wasn't going to do any more slow speed tests as it was not worth the risk. Problem is, now having to be mindful of the speed because of violent tip stalls was going to make flying this not as enjoyable as it would have been otherwise. Stall behavior is part of the reason why I loved both my MyFly Dream planes, the Crosswind and the Crosswind Mini, and why I love the Reptile Dragon, both the V1 and V2. There isn't a hint of tip stall. The Ichin air loader also had an amazing stall behavior, and it could actually be forced to go into a flat spin and easily taken out of it at will. And the sight of a plane of this type doing this was absolutely amazing. In terms of agility, the MARS was alright, not the quickest roller, but it was decent, and there was plenty of thrust for some verticals and loops, but then again, this thing was not really designed with that in mind. Overall, I was happy with the plane, minus the tip stalling, so apparently I did proceed with installing the 1.3 GHz video gear on the antenna tracker. Next flight was a few days later, but you might notice the conditions are markedly different, though it was even colder despite not having any snow. That was because I was working in another city on a boat drone project, and I took the MARS with me so I can fly it at the coast. And as you can see, the MARS was not the only thing I had to take with me. For whatever reason, which I can't recall right now, the little one was skipping kindergarten for a few days, so I took her with me. Yeah. She was raised around drones, that one, still is to this day, though today she's now twice as tall. Damn it, time flies, and they do grow up so fast. I miss her being that little bundle of cuteness so much. As for the plane, following another flawless takeoff, I kept in mind not to slow down too much and got to flying. It was a late afternoon in January, so the days were short and the sun was almost gone already, but the whole day was super windy and it had just now calmed down, so even if I could fly earlier, I wouldn't have. After flying around for a bit to make sure all is good, I headed out over the water and tried to get as low as I was comfortable with, but not too low that I'd get behind trees or buildings. After that, I decided to gain some altitude and go long to see how the 1.3 GHz video system will do. I don't have a DVR for that flight, but from what I remember and confirming my direction and location on Google Maps, I made it out to somewhere between 10 and 15 kilometers before turning back, mainly because it was getting darker and I didn't want to push it more at a new location. Although the chances of getting lost here with a reference point such as this were pretty much below zero. Just like the temperature. On the way back though, since I still had more than enough battery left, I decided to make a slight detour and go visit the harbor. Took a while to get there because it was much further from the plane than I was, but I did shave off the altitude to get a better look. Just look at that calm sea. The wind really had died down a good deal and now things were very peaceful. Also, my reasoning for flying around here was end of the workday, it's a harbor, lots of concrete and steel, lots of water, chances of this piece of foam causing any real damage to anything, if the worst happens, were pretty slim, so I took my chance. All went well and after a bit I headed back to home point. Came back and landed without issue, and here you can see my colleague was having some fun with his micro model as I was wrestling to pack everything up. Those were some good times. Next flight session was back at a familiar place a couple of days later, and this time I had the DVR working. You might notice I was not using the popular Minim OSD, which was all the rage for autopilot up to a point. Since I had the MyFly Dream Telefly Pro OSD in the plane for the antenna tracker to work, I also used it as the OSD for the plane, though the information I was getting was very limited compared to a Mavlink OSD, but it was good enough to do a flight. I had ground speed, distance from home, satellite count, total distance and altitude, but since the plane was running on a 4S battery pack and the OSD can only take 12 volts, I had it powered from a dual output S-BEC, which I used to power the servos. It can output 5 volts and 12 volts at the same time, hence why the OSD's voltage reading was just under 12 volts, but this is also why I hadn't switched off the OSD of the FPV camera I was using, because it had a voltage monitoring wire and it was connected to the battery. So through the camera's OSD I was monitoring the battery voltage, through the MyFly Dreams OSD I was keeping an eye on the rest. The goal for the day was mainly to go far and to see what the 1.3 GHz video system can do. So, after takeoff, I headed out into the wind. Before getting some altitude so I can push the distance, I took the opportunity to do some long-range, sort of proximity flying around some hills and treetops, kept as low as I felt comfortable with, given the terrain, distance and the threat of getting behind something and losing the video signal has happened before, as Gary would probably be quick to remind us, so I am always mindful now. I did keep relatively low and kept climbing just above the trees to the top of the tallest hill. It was a bit bumpy because there was some wind, so it wasn't the most calming experience, but I enjoyed it either way. This point here was 7.5 kilometers away from takeoff point. From here, it was now all about distance. Sadly, I only had usable video signal out to about 11 kilometers, which is pretty pathetic for a 1.3 GHz video system, but then everything was pretty old at that time, and it is possible I might not have filtered power properly or interference from something else was affecting it. But 18 kilometers is the distance where I stopped seeing anything on the video feed, so I turned around and came back. The way back had the benefit of a decent tailwind, so the Mars returned rather quickly, and the rest of the flight was spent messing about, doing some aerobatics and even doing some inverted flying, which the Mars handled pretty well. Sadly, just as I was turning around for the landing approach, I misjudged the speed and the Mars bit me. Tip stalled and it wasn't high enough for me to be able to do much about it. Perhaps if it was 20 meters higher, I might have saved it, but it wasn't, so the result was a crash, luckily in the snow and not in the dirt, which was right next to it, so it didn't get dirty. But it did break a bunch of stuff, including ungluing pretty much every plywood piece which was holding foam together, and also breaking the whole rear because the motor flew out. I did see Painless 360's video on the Mars, and he had the exact same thing happen, although at a much lower altitude, so the damage to his was not as severe. But there we have it. I wasn't the only one this model bit for not minding the speed. This incident pretty much sealed the plane's fate. I put it away and haven't touched it since, and for the past 4 years I have been literally tripping over it constantly in my workshop, but I have no desire to fix it, plus I've already removed most of its gear and used it on other projects, better stow handling projects, which do not keep me worried all the time while they're in the air. So, this is the story of my Mars plane. Probably not the best landing, but I had some good time with it, and it flew over water more than any other plane I've ever had. Can't say that I miss it though, it's no XUAV Clouds or Reptile Dragon V2, even the Aggressor, also known as the Duck, had more character than this thing, and did not tip stall like this. Actually, the Duck was the first plane to carry any CE gear for testing, and it is the plane I used for the initial range test I did on the CHM30 module when I first got it just over 4 years ago. Perhaps if the Mars had slightly forward swept wings, things might have been different, and consequently its fate might have been different too. But that's the thing, isn't it? Might have been, so we will never know. As for that 1.3 GHz video system, I wasn't overly impressed by the performance, so I never used it again. If you have enjoyed this video and found it useful, please do like and comment. The engagement does help the channel grow. Also, for those who haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, and also clicking the bell so you can get notified when new content is uploaded. A huge thank you to all my YouTube members, Patreon supporters, and anyone who has and still is supporting this channel, and if you'd like to join in, check out the video description below. Happy flying, and I will see you soon.